The bright morning sun poured through the narrow window of Flight 427, illuminating the young woman's calm, focused face as she sat quietly in seat 14A. Around her, passengers chatted, scrolled through phones, or stared out the windows, distracted by the familiar hum of the airplane's engines. But she remained motionless, her eyes fixed on the endless expanse of blue sky beyond the small glass pane. There was an intensity in her gaze, a quiet reverence that seemed to exist in a world entirely her own. Then, as the airplane climbed higher, the faint roar of distant jet engines reached her ears, gradually growing louder. Through the glint of sunlight on the horizon, she spotted them, a formation of sleek fighter jets slicing through the sky, their precise movements almost ritualistic, each plane glinting sharply under the morning light. She lifted her hand slowly, palm flat, her posture straight, and gave a crisp, unwavering salute toward the jets. It was a simple gesture, yet charged with a weight that no other passenger could understand. Around her, fellow travelers barely noticed, dismissing the moment as a casual hand wave to something far away. Yet in that salute was a lifetime of experience, discipline, and a past carefully hidden from the world, one that would soon astonish everyone who looked closely. As the jets approached in tight formation, their synchronized movements a blend of human skill and mechanical precision, the woman's heartbeat quickened. Though her expression remained calm, her fingers trembled just slightly, not out of fear but from a surge of emotion that had been building for years. Each jet's roar seemed to resonate with something deep within her. Memories of countless missions, long hours in the cockpit, early mornings spent under open skies, and a dedication that few could ever comprehend. She remembered the first time she had climbed into a fighter jet. The rush of wind and adrenaline, the infinite possibilities stretched before her as the plane lifted off the runway, leaving the earth far below. That exhilaration had become part of her identity. Yet it was a secret she had long kept hidden from the civilian world. Today she was not in a cockpit but on a commercial flight, blending into the ordinary crowd, and yet the sky recognized her in a way that words could never capture. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, greeting passengers and giving routine flight instructions, completely oblivious to the extraordinary moment unfolding in 14A. She followed his voice politely but kept her eyes fixed on the horizon. As the formation drew nearer, she could discern the insignia on the sides of the jets, sharp emblems, bold stripes, a symbol of authority and power that once had been intimately familiar. She recalled the countless drills, the precision maneuvers executed during exercises, the weight of responsibility in her hands every time she had taken the controls of a fighter jet. And now, from a window seat on a commercial flight, she paid homage to that past, a salute that bridged her ordinary present with an extraordinary history. The jets responded in their own way, their formation subtly adjusting as if acknowledging her gesture. Of course, to anyone else on the plane it seemed coincidental, a natural movement in the air currents. But she knew better. She had trained her entire life to notice patterns, signals, and intentions, to read the sky the way a musician reads notes on a page. Her salute was met with recognition from those who understood, even if they could not know her personally. Her lips pressed together, holding back a quiet smile as she felt an almost imperceptible shift in the energy around her. It was a fleeting moment, yet it carried the weight of countless hours of dedication, sacrifice, and mastery that few in the world could claim. Passengers shifted in their seats, some turning to the window to glimpse the jets unaware of the significance. A child pointed excitedly at the planes, a woman snapped photos with her phone, and a few men in business suits exchanged mild amusement at the spectacle. None could sense the layers of meaning behind the simple salute, the decades of rigorous training, the discipline of someone who had once commanded the very machines now glinting in sunlight outside their plane. It was a silent acknowledgement of a past life, a bridge between two worlds, the world of ordinary civilians and the hidden realm of aerial warriors. Her mind drifted through memories she had never shared, missions flown in low visibility, nights spent navigating uncharted territories, the bond with fellow pilots forged through shared danger and mutual trust. Every detail returned in sharp clarity. The weight of her helmet, the hum of engines at takeoff, the precise choreography required to maintain formation under extreme conditions. And yet in the present she performed a simple act, a salute through the window, that contained all of that history in a single gesture. Time seemed to suspend itself, The roar of the jets, the hum of the engines, the quiet chatter of passengers blended into a moment of singular clarity. As the jets climbed higher, the sunlight catching on their fuselages, she could see the shadows they cast over the clouds below. Her mind, trained to read threats and trajectories, traced each plane's path instinctively. Her fingers remained firm in salute, her eyes unwavering. A flash of emotion crossed her face, pride, nostalgia, and a touch of melancholy. The world around her could never fully comprehend the depth of this moment, yet she didn't need their understanding. It was enough that she remembered, that she recognized the connection between her past and the sky, that she honored the discipline and courage that had defined her life. The flight attendants passed by, polite smiles, offering beverages and assistance, oblivious to the extraordinary display occurring beside them. One passenger in the next row leaned over and asked if she knew the pilots, and she merely nodded subtly, not speaking. Her silence was deliberate. Words could never capture the gravity of what she had lived. A single gesture, the salute, conveyed respect, recognition, and a private acknowledgement of an identity hidden from the ordinary world. The captain's voice returned over the intercom, announcing cruising altitude and estimated arrival times. She listened politely, her eyes never leaving the horizon. The jets began to fade into the distance, climbing toward higher skies, their roar diminishing, yet the impact of their presence lingered. Her hand slowly lowered, but the calm expression on her face held the quiet power of someone who had carried the weight of command, responsibility, and honor throughout her life. She settled back into her seat, her mind still tracing the arcs of the jets, replaying the moment in vivid clarity. As the passengers continued their routines, reading, sleeping, scrolling through devices, she allowed herself a brief smile, knowing that a connection had been made, however invisible to the world around her. It was a personal acknowledgement of a past that few could imagine, a reminder that identity, skill, and courage exist even when hidden beneath the ordinary appearances of daily life. The sky had recognized her, even if no one else had, and that alone was enough. By the time the flight reached cruising altitude over open fields and mountains, the jets had vanished from sight, leaving only a memory and the distant echo of engines. She leaned back in her seat, her thoughts drifting between past and present, and reflected on a journey that had begun decades earlier in flight schools, training grounds and missions that few could ever imagine. The salute had been simple yet profound, a bridge across time, experience, and worlds. In that single gesture, she had acknowledged her history, honored her companions, and quietly reminded the sky of her place within it. Around her, the plane hummed with ordinary life, passengers immersed in mundane distractions, yet she remained a silent monument to dedication, courage, and the hidden lives that sometimes intersect with the ordinary. And though no one else on the plane could comprehend the full story, the sky had witnessed it, and in that moment, she felt complete. A woman at peace with the weight of her past and the quiet acknowledgement of the present. The moment lingered long after the jets had gone, an invisible thread connecting her to the extraordinary world she had once commanded. And somewhere deep inside, she knew that the salute, though brief and unseen by most, had carried everything. Pride, respect, honor, and a lifetime of skill hidden behind a single, perfect gesture. As Flight 427 soared steadily above the clouds, a quiet tension lingered in the cabin. The extraordinary sight of fighter jets in formation outside the window had already passed, but the effect on the young woman in seat 14A remained palpable. Passengers had returned to their distractions, yet a few eyes occasionally wandered toward her, sensing a subtle aura of confidence and purpose. She was calm, composed, and utterly ordinary in appearance, a plain blouse, simple jeans, and a worn leather jacket. Yet the intensity in her eyes hinted at experiences far beyond what anyone could imagine. For most, she was just another passenger. For those attuned to the nuances of presence and energy, she was a force unto herself. Unbeknownst to anyone on board, the woman's life had been defined by precision, courage, and a relentless pursuit of excellence. She had been born into a family steeped in military tradition, her father a decorated fighter pilot and her mother a renowned strategist. From an early age, she had been immersed in an environment where discipline and skill were not just expected, but celebrated. By the age of 10, she could identify aircraft models by the sound of their engines alone. By 15, she had memorized every major flight path over North America, and had trained on flight simulators so advanced that they replicated real-world conditions perfectly. Her adolescence was a series of rigorous exercises, physical conditioning, and academic study, all designed to prepare her for the world she would inherit. One of flight, precision, and command. Her teenage years had been filled with long hours at the airfield, watching her father maneuver through maneuvers with elegance and exactitude. He would often speak in the language of the sky, describing wind currents, aerodynamics, and tactical formations as if they were poetry. She absorbed everything, practicing control, spatial awareness, and quick decision-making until these skills became second nature. Her instructors recognized early on that she possessed a rare combination of intelligence, focus, and instinct, qualities that could make her one of the most formidable pilots of her generation. By 18, she had already logged hundreds of hours in advanced jets, mastering maneuvers that took others years to comprehend. Each flight was not just training, but a lesson in discipline, awareness, and anticipation. Yet despite her extraordinary abilities, she had lived much of her early life in secrecy. Media exposure, accolades, and public attention were deliberately avoided. Her family had always insisted that skill, courage, and honor were demonstrated through action, not recognition. She trained, excelled, and contributed without expecting applause, understanding that true mastery often goes unnoticed by those who do not share the path. It was this philosophy that guided her in adulthood, shaping not only her career but her interactions with the world at large. Her professional career had been equally remarkable. She had been selected for a special unit within the Air Force, a team of elite pilots tasked with missions requiring precision, discretion, and adaptability. Her aptitude for leadership was unparalleled. She could read the sky, anticipate maneuvers, and synchronize actions with others in ways that seemed almost intuitive. Fellow pilots often described her as a silent force, present, aware, and unflinchingly competent. Missions flown under her guidance had consistently succeeded against formidable odds, earning her the respect of superiors while keeping her largely anonymous to the public. This anonymity had been intentional, a way to maintain operational security while honing her skills. Despite her demanding career, she had always retained a profound connection to the human side of her experience. She understood fear, hope, and courage not just in herself but in those around her. She had trained countless younger pilots, instilling in them the importance of calm under pressure, strategic thinking, and the quiet power of discipline. Her mentorship was subtle yet transformative, often revealing itself only in moments of crisis when her protégés executed maneuvers flawlessly, guided by lessons absorbed in hushed conversations and shared experiences. It was this depth of understanding that made her salute to the jets so profound. To the casual observer, it was a fleeting gesture, perhaps sentimental or whimsical. To those who understood her past, it was a recognition of shared experience, a tribute to countless hours of training, and a demonstration of mutual respect between someone who had mastered the sky and those who continued to honor its traditions. The jets were not just machines to her. They were extensions of a philosophy she had lived by: precision, honor, courage, and respect. Back on the flight, subtle signs began to hint at her extraordinary background. One of the flight attendants, a young woman named Maria, noticed the posture and precision of her salute, the unspoken confidence that radiated from her every movement. It was the kind of presence that made people instinctively respect her, even without understanding why. Maria had grown up around military families herself, and she could sense qualities she had only seen in elite pilots: calm under observation, controlled movements, and an aura of quiet authority. She began watching discreetly, curious about the passenger who seemed so ordinary yet exuded an unusual gravitas. Meanwhile, the other passengers started to notice subtle details. A businessman in the row behind noticed the meticulous way she arranged her belongings, the way she scanned the cabin and sky almost instinctively, and the subtle tracking of movements outside the window, with an almost imperceptible calculation. A young boy watching through the window sensed something heroic, something larger than life in her salute. It was as if she carried with her a story untold, a history invisible yet palpable, touching those who could sense its presence even without comprehension. Her calm demeanor continued, unaffected by the growing curiosity around her. She knew that her past would eventually reveal itself, not through boasts or explanations, but through actions and the unmistakable resonance of competence and courage. The memory of missions, exercises, and training flickered through her mind as she imagined the formation outside, recalling the drills and maneuvers she had executed countless times, not as performance but as preparation for moments such as this. Every instinct, every reflex, every calculation was embedded in her, surfacing naturally, effortlessly, in response to a situation that seemed ordinary yet resonated with profound significance. At one point, a passenger near the aisle, unable to contain curiosity, whispered to the man beside her, "Do you know who she is? She seems like she belongs in a cockpit, not on a commercial flight." The man shook his head, bemused, but there was an undertone of recognition in his eyes, a vague understanding that what they were witnessing was rare, exceptional, and not to be dismissed. The young woman remained unaware, her focus entirely on the sky and the distant roar of jets fading as they climbed higher. As the flight progressed, small incidents continued to hint at her remarkable past. When turbulence briefly rattled the cabin, she adjusted her posture instinctively, demonstrating a calm that suggested years of experience in extreme conditions. Her gaze swept the cabin once, noting the reactions of others, ensuring everyone was secure and comfortable, a subtle reflection of leadership training ingrained in her from youth. Even the flight crew, experienced in handling countless passengers, could not help but sense a presence that went beyond the ordinary, an aura of command and assurance that subtly altered the energy in the cabin. Beyond the immediate flight, her history was layered with accomplishments hidden from public view. Classified missions, strategic exercises, and rigorous training programs had sculpted a life of excellence, yet she carried it lightly, never seeking recognition. Each act, each movement, each decision had been a part of a greater tapestry, a life devoted to mastery, respect, and service. And now, in the quiet gesture of a salute toward passing fighter jets, decades of experience, discipline, and honor manifested in a single, fluid motion. By the time Flight 427 reached cruising altitude above vast stretches of ocean, the woman leaned back, her hand lowering slowly from the salute, yet the energy of her presence remained. The passengers continued their routines, some still glancing occasionally toward the window, others immersed in personal distractions, unaware of the profound history seated quietly among them. For her, this was a bridge, a fleeting connection between her past and present, a reminder of the life she had led and the values she had upheld, now expressed in silence and gesture, witnessed by the sky itself. The subtle hints of her extraordinary past began to circulate quietly among attentive observers. Flight attendants, pilots, and perceptive passengers started connecting dots. The precision, calm, and innate authority of a woman who seemed ordinary, but carried the weight of the extraordinary. Whispers grew into fascination and fascination into speculation. Some wondered if she had been a decorated pilot, a military strategist, or someone trained in ways that transcended the average experience of ordinary life. Her calm smile, thoughtful gaze, and the dignified salute became the silent narrative of the flight, telling a story no words could fully capture. And though no official records yet revealed her full history, the story had begun to leak into perception. A young woman on a commercial flight, quietly acknowledging fighter jets passing outside, carrying the legacy of countless missions, hours of disciplined training, and the spirit of someone who had mastered the sky. The ordinary cabin, the mundane flight, became a stage for a narrative far greater than anyone aboard could imagine, a narrative that would slowly unfold, revealing the extraordinary life behind a simple, perfect salute. By mid-afternoon, Flight 427 had settled into a smooth rhythm, the hum of the engines creating a low, constant background that seemed to soothe most passengers into a semi-drowsy state. But in seat 14A, the young woman remained alert, her posture composed, her gaze constantly drifting between the endless blue sky outside the window and the subtle movements within the cabin. Something about her presence had begun to ripple quietly through the surrounding passengers. It was not loud, not obvious, but perceptible to those with even a fraction of attention, a presence that commanded subtle respect without a single word. The first hints that she was extraordinary had begun to surface, as though the world itself acknowledged her quietly. A flight attendant, Maria, moved along the aisle, delivering drinks and offering polite smiles. She paused briefly near 14A, noticing the meticulous way the woman folded her napkin and arranged her belongings. Her movements were precise, almost ritualistic, as if each action had a purpose beyond mere habit. Maria's curiosity was piqued. She had grown up in a military family and could sense the discipline in those small gestures. There was a rhythm, a controlled confidence that betrayed training at an elite level. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to most, yet to Maria, it screamed of someone whose life had been forged in structured, high-stakes environments. Meanwhile, a young boy seated 2 rows ahead craned his neck to look back at her through the aisle. His eyes widened as he saw her gaze once again meet the sky, her hand instinctively lifting in a slight, almost imperceptible salute. He didn't understand why it seemed so significant, only that there was something awe-inspiring about the calm determination radiating from her. His mother, noticing his repeated glances, whispered, "She must have some kind of secret, dear. Look at how poised she is." The boy nodded solemnly, sensing that whatever her secret was, it carried a weight far beyond ordinary life. Across the cabin, a middle-aged businessman tapped on his laptop absently, but couldn't help stealing glances at the young woman. He observed the way she tracked the sky, subtly tilting her head as if calculating wind currents and jet trajectories. He caught her fleeting eye contact with a small squadron of jets that appeared in the distance, and for a moment, she seemed to speak without words, a silent acknowledgement between someone who understood the machines and those who commanded them. The businessman frowned slightly, sensing that her life had been intertwined with aerial operations at a level he could barely comprehend. It was as if she belonged not in a commercial airplane, but among the elite pilots soaring through the sky in perfect formation. As Flight 427 passed over vast mountain ranges and sprawling forests below, the captain made a routine announcement. "We are currently cruising at 35,000 feet, with an expected arrival in approximately 2 hours. Weather ahead is clear and all systems are functioning normally." Most passengers barely registered the words, absorbed in their digital devices or casual conversations, but the young woman listened attentively, a slight nod accompanying her subtle tracking of the jet's path outside. Her mind worked in layers, noting altitude, wind currents, engine performance, and trajectory with an instinct honed by years of experience. Each calculation was subconscious, yet precise, a reflection of countless hours spent mastering the sky. Her posture and composure did not go unnoticed by a retired Air Force colonel seated a few rows back. He had flown jets himself decades ago, and recognized the telltale signs of training, discipline, and mastery in the woman before him. He watched her subtly shift her weight in sync with minor turbulence, adjusting her seating position in a way that suggested someone used to navigating high-stakes environments. There was a familiarity in her gestures, a rhythm reminiscent of a pilot adjusting to the unique dynamics of high-speed flight. Though he did not know her, he felt a silent acknowledgement, a recognition that she had flown, and flown well. At one point, the woman reached for her bag, her movements deliberate, controlled, and unhurried. She withdrew a small notebook and a pen, flipping to a page filled with intricate sketches and diagrams. Lines representing flight paths, angles, and aerodynamic calculations crisscrossed the page, annotated with precision. If a casual observer had glanced at it, it would have seemed like an ordinary hobby of someone fascinated by aviation. But to those who could read the language of the sky, it was immediately clear. This was the work of someone who had not only studied flight in theory, but mastered it in practice. Maria, observing discreetly from a distance, noticed the notebook and the way the woman referenced it subtly as she observed passing jets. Her curiosity deepened, and she began to suspect that there was far more to this passenger than met the eye. A fellow passenger, a young photographer traveling for work, had been capturing shots of the jets from the window seat nearby. When he glanced toward seat 14A, he noticed her subtle smile as her hand lifted in a salute once more, this time toward a distant formation of military aircraft that had appeared unexpectedly in the sky. He instinctively raised his camera to capture the moment, but hesitated. There was something intimate, almost sacred about her gesture. It was not a casual wave, but a symbol of respect and recognition, a bridge between her past and the present moment. His curiosity turned into fascination, and he found himself trying to understand who she was, though the clues remained elusive. In the galley, the lead flight attendant whispered to a colleague, "Have you noticed her? There's something different about her. She moves like she owns the air even though she's just a passenger." The colleague shrugged, unable to articulate why, but both agreed there was an unmistakable aura of authority, discipline, and calm in her presence. It was subtle enough not to alarm anyone, but powerful enough to leave a lasting impression. Passengers continued their routines, but the undercurrent of intrigue began to grow. The woman's mind wandered back to memories carefully tucked away over years of service. She recalled formations executed under perfect blue skies, high-stakes missions flown with precision under pressure, and the camaraderie of fellow pilots who shared unspoken understandings. Those experiences, once part of her daily life, now resurfaced as subtle, reflexive actions: the tilt of her head, the adjustment of her posture, the quiet calculation of angles and distances. Each movement was ordinary in isolation, but extraordinary when viewed in the context of her hidden past. A few hours into the flight, turbulence caused the cabin lights to flicker slightly. Passengers instinctively gripped their armrests, some murmuring nervously. The young woman remained unshaken, her composure unbroken. She scanned the cabin quickly, noting which passengers might require reassurance, and offered a brief calm nod or a comforting glance. Her ability to remain composed under pressure, coupled with a keen situational awareness, subtly influenced the cabin environment. Without speaking, she exuded a leadership presence that reassured those around her, a quiet authority born of years of high-stakes experience. Whispers began to circulate among the passengers, subtle questions about her background, her calm demeanor, and the way she observed the jets. Speculation grew. Was she a retired pilot? A military officer? Someone with secret knowledge of aerial operations? No one could confirm, but the hints were undeniable. Her notebook, her gestures, and the instinctive salute had planted seeds of curiosity that would only deepen as the flight progressed. By the time the plane reached its cruising altitude over a vast stretch of ocean, the signs of her extraordinary past were undeniable to those who had been paying attention. The jets had long disappeared from view, yet her posture, subtle movements, and quiet vigilance communicated more than words ever could. Observers in the cabin began to piece together the fragments of her history, sensing a connection to something far greater than a commercial flight could suggest. Her identity remained mostly hidden, but the hints were enough to leave a lasting impression. This was no ordinary passenger. Even the captain, speaking briefly over the intercom to reassure passengers, sensed a presence in the cabin that was unusual. Though unaware of her past, he could not shake the feeling that seat 14A contained someone extraordinary. A woman whose life had been spent mastering the sky, whose gestures carried silent authority, and whose very presence subtly commanded respect. And as Flight 427 continued toward its destination, the stage was quietly being set for the revelation of her true identity, a story that would leave every observer stunned and forever alter the ordinary perception of what it meant to sit quietly in a window seat. The flight continued its journey, cruising above endless stretches of blue ocean, the sun reflecting off the airplane's metal fuselage and casting a warm glow through the windows. Seat 14A remained a quiet epicenter of intrigue, its occupant a young woman whose calm demeanor and precise gestures had already begun to capture the subtle attention of the cabin. Passengers and crew alike found themselves drawn into a silent curiosity, sensing that there was far more behind her ordinary exterior than could possibly be imagined. The realization was slow to dawn, like sunlight creeping across a horizon, but its impact promised to be profound. By mid-flight, the air in the cabin had begun to hum with unspoken questions. Flight attendants moved with practiced efficiency, yet several found their gazes returning repeatedly to the woman. Maria, the young attendant with a military background herself, had already begun forming theories. She had noticed small details: the disciplined way the woman adjusted her seatbelt, the subtle tracking of aircraft outside, and the poised handling of turbulence. Each action was deliberate, measured, and carried an authority that could not be taught casually. Maria had seen such qualities only in highly trained pilots or military officers, and the realization filled her with a mix of awe and anticipation. There was no way the world outside would understand it, she thought. Yet here, in this confined cabin, the traces of a remarkable life could be read in every motion. Meanwhile, a few perceptive passengers began comparing notes in whispers. The businessman in the row behind had noticed the intricate notebook full of flight paths, sketches, and calculations. He discreetly showed a photo of one page to the woman seated next to him, who gasped softly. recognizing some of the notation as highly specialized. "These aren't normal hobbyist diagrams," she murmured, eyes wide. "This is advanced training material. Military or elite flight academy level at least." Their curiosity was piqued further, and the seed of speculation spread like wildfire. Though no one spoke directly to her, their collective awareness built a quiet tension, as if the cabin itself were holding its breath in anticipation of what might unfold. The young woman, oblivious to the scrutiny, maintained her focus on the horizon, where the distant roar of fighter jets once again drew her gaze. She was not seeking recognition, nor did she intend to reveal her identity, yet the past had a way of asserting itself. Memories flooded her mind. The first time she had climbed into a fighter jet, the disciplined drills, long nights of training in adverse conditions, the camaraderie and mutual trust shared among elite pilots, and the silent pride that came with every successful mission. Every gesture she made now, though subtle, was imbued with decades of experience, discipline, and mastery. The world around her had no idea of the weight behind that serene expression, or the history contained in a simple, precise salute. A retired Air Force colonel seated several rows back had by now pieced together enough clues to sense her extraordinary background. He noticed the same details Maria had: posture, gestures, calm under turbulence, and precise tracking of aircraft movements outside. He leaned slightly to the passenger next to him and whispered, "She's been in the service, a fighter pilot, or at the very least trained at a highly elite level. Watch how she handles herself. No ordinary passenger does this." His words carried a mix of awe and disbelief as he tried to reconcile the woman before him with someone capable of commanding the sky with such quiet authority. At this point, subtle patterns began to emerge that hinted at her true identity. When a brief announcement came from the cockpit, giving weather updates and cruising information, she absorbed the data effortlessly, silently calculating optimal flight paths, potential wind variations, and even the aircraft's response to slight turbulence. Her notebook lay open, pages annotated with detailed observations, calculations, and sketches that most passengers would never understand. The symbols, angles, and diagrams spoke of years of rigorous training and missions, requiring both mental acuity and precise execution. Her actions were seamless, intuitive, and authoritative, signaling a past few could imagine. As the flight pressed onward, the atmosphere in the cabin became increasingly charged with curiosity and quiet speculation. A photographer seated several rows away had begun snapping pictures discreetly, capturing the subtle interactions of her hand movements and the notebook, though he hesitated to intrude further. A mother seated nearby whispered to her son, "She must have been someone important. Look at the way she carries herself. That's not just confidence, that's experience you can't fake." The boy nodded, captivated by her calm presence and the way she seemed to command the invisible airspace outside the plane. With a simple, graceful gesture, at one point turbulence jolted the plane slightly, causing passengers to tighten their grips on armrests. The young woman remained entirely unshaken, adjusting her position fluidly, her eyes scanning the cabin and sky simultaneously. The subtle movements, shifting weight, slight head tilt, and quick calculations, conveyed command, leadership, and awareness. She instinctively provided reassurance through small gestures, a nod, a calm glance, a measured exhale that radiated control. To those who noticed, the effect was tangible, a silent authority that calmed nerves and subtly influenced the energy of the cabin. Her story began to slowly reveal itself in fragments, enough to intrigue and captivate. A passenger noticed the insignia drawn lightly in her notebook, emblems reminiscent of elite fighter squadrons. Another recognized the style of her annotations, precise and disciplined in a way that suggested formal military training. The retired colonel quietly confirmed his suspicions internally, noting that this passenger, seated quietly among ordinary travelers, carried the traits of someone whose life had been devoted to aerial mastery. Though the world outside remained oblivious, within the cabin a realization was forming. This woman was not merely a passenger. She was someone extraordinary. Meanwhile, the young woman's thoughts continued to drift to her past, memories unfolding like chapters in an unspoken narrative. She recalled high-speed maneuvers, coordinated squadron exercises, and the responsibility of leading missions that required split-second decisions with far-reaching consequences. She thought of the countless times she had trained for contingencies, anticipated every variable, and executed complex aerial formations flawlessly. These memories were not merely recollections. They were a part of her identity, surfacing naturally in the small, deliberate gestures she displayed now, the salute, the scanning of the horizon, the precise handling of her belongings, and the unspoken awareness of her environment. A young aviation enthusiast seated near the emergency exit had been watching her closely, captivated by the combination of poise, intelligence, and quiet authority. He leaned toward his friend and whispered, "I think she's a pilot, or maybe even a commander. Look at the way she carries herself. I've never seen anything like it." His friend nodded, eyes wide with fascination, as the cabin seemed to hum with the unspoken acknowledgement of her extraordinary background. Every small gesture, her posture, the hand lifted in a salute, the careful attention to the passing jets, hinted at decades of experience, skill, and mastery. By now the flight crew had begun to take notice as well. The captain, speaking over the intercom, remarked casually on the calm atmosphere in the cabin, unaware that seat 14A was quietly orchestrating a subtle influence over everyone around her. Flight attendants exchanged glances, noting her composed demeanor and instinctive movements that exuded authority without confrontation. Even the most seasoned crew members found themselves intrigued, sensing that the ordinary passenger in 14A was anything but ordinary. The sun had shifted slightly in the sky, casting warm golden light across her face and illuminating the notebook filled with precise sketches, calculations, and notes. Each page reflected a life of rigorous discipline and unparalleled focus, a testament to training, courage, and mastery. Observers, both passengers and crew, began to piece together the fragments of a story that transcended the mundane, a hidden life revealed subtly through posture, gestures, and instinctive responses to the world around her. By late afternoon, a quiet excitement had begun to ripple through the cabin. Whispers circulated about her possible background: elite pilot, military strategist, or a member of an extraordinary squadron whose identity had remained hidden from the public. Observers speculated, compared notes, and shared glances filled with awe and disbelief. And through it all, she remained serene, aware of the growing curiosity but unmoved, her focus on the horizon, her salute, and the quiet recognition of a past that had shaped every fiber of her being. As Flight 427 pressed onward toward its destination, the stage was set for the eventual revelation. The passengers, the crew, and even the casual observers were unknowingly converging on the truth, guided by subtle cues and instinctive recognition. The quiet authority, the precise gestures, and the undeniable aura of mastery made it clear. Seat 14A held someone extraordinary. What remained was for the final pieces to fall into place, a revelation that would astonish, inspire, and forever change the way everyone on board perceived a simple passenger in a window seat. As Flight 427 approached the late afternoon horizon, the golden sunlight slanted through the cabin windows, casting a warm, almost reverent glow over seat 14A. The young woman remained calm, her hand occasionally lifting in a subtle salute to passing aircraft visible from the window, a reflexive, instinctive gesture rooted in years of discipline and experience. Around her, passengers were beginning to notice patterns, pieces of a puzzle that hinted at something far greater than a casual flight. Whispers circulated, eyes lingered, and an unspoken curiosity filled the cabin air. Even the crew could feel the extraordinary aura that radiated from this otherwise unassuming passenger. A retired Air Force colonel seated several rows back could no longer contain his growing recognition. He leaned forward slightly, whispering to the passenger beside him, "I'm telling you, she's one of the most elite pilots I've ever seen. Look at her composure, her gestures, even the way she tracks the jets outside. That's not something you learn overnight. She's a commander, a strategist, someone who's spent years mastering the sky." The man beside him nodded in astonishment, glancing toward seat 14A with a mixture of disbelief and awe. Observers across the cabin quietly pieced together subtle clues: the notebook full of technical sketches, the instinctive salutes, the calm authority under minor turbulence, until the realization began to crystallize. This woman was no ordinary passenger. Even the flight attendants, trained to manage passengers and detect signs of distress or unusual behavior, began noticing nuances. Maria, in particular, could not shake the feeling that she was in the presence of someone extraordinary, The way the woman handled her movements, the precise, deliberate gestures, and her serene demeanor amidst a bustling cabin signaled years of elite training. Maria observed discreetly as the young woman's eyes tracked a distant formation of military jets glinting in the sunlight. When the jets performed a synchronized maneuver, the woman's subtle nod and brief salute seemed almost ceremonial, a private acknowledgement of a shared language and history that few could understand. The young woman's mind drifted back to decades of experience that had led her to this point. Memories of missions flown at high altitude, exercises conducted under extreme conditions, and leadership exercised in high-stakes scenarios flowed through her consciousness. Each memory was tied to precise movements and decisions that had saved lives and executed operations flawlessly. And yet here she was, blending seamlessly into the cabin of a commercial airliner, performing a gesture, a simple, dignified salute that carried the weight of her extraordinary past. As she lowered her hand from the salute, a subtle murmur began to ripple across the cabin. Passengers who had been observing her discreetly whispered to one another, trying to piece together the evidence of her past. The businessman who had examined her notebook nudged the photographer seated nearby, murmuring, "Look at the diagrams. These are not hobbyist sketches. She's trained at the highest levels, possibly military or even special operations. There's no way a civilian would produce notes like this." The photographer's eyes widened, capturing fleeting images of the notebook pages while resisting the urge to intrude further. The energy in the cabin had shifted. Curiosity had evolved into a sense of reverence. Meanwhile, the young woman's thoughts continued to wander through moments that had shaped her life. The first time she had taken command in the cockpit, the countless drills and exercises, the trust and camaraderie shared with fellow pilots, and the profound sense of responsibility that came with commanding the sky. These experiences had defined her, and now in a moment of ordinary travel they surfaced subtly in posture, gaze, and gesture. Each movement, each glance carried layers of meaning, a silent narrative revealing itself to those who could perceive beyond the ordinary. The captain, noticing the quiet intensity among certain passengers, briefly adjusted his intercom message. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're cruising smoothly and on schedule. Please remain seated as we approach our destination." His words were routine, yet there was an almost imperceptible shift in the cabin's energy, as if everyone were aware that something remarkable was quietly unfolding among them. Flight attendants glancing discreetly at seat 14A exchanged knowing looks. The patterns of movement, the disciplined poise, and the quiet confidence of the woman were impossible to ignore. A sudden commotion near the window caught the attention of several passengers. A low-flying squadron of jets appeared on the horizon, glinting in the golden sunlight, performing precise maneuvers. The young woman instinctively raised her hand in salute once more, her eyes tracking every movement with expert precision. To anyone else, it was a simple, polite gesture, but to those who understood, it was a recognition, a communication across decades of shared discipline and experience. The jet's formation subtly shifted in response, a mirrored salute that seemed almost ceremonial, reinforcing the unspoken acknowledgement between those in the air and the lone observer in seat 14A. Whispers spread rapidly through the cabin. Passengers began quietly speculating, piecing together the fragments of her hidden life, the precise hand movements, the strategic awareness, the intricate notebook filled with technical sketches, and the poised handling of turbulence. Some connected the dots, realizing that this woman could have been a commander or an elite pilot, someone whose skill and discipline had been honed to perfection over years of rigorous training. The fascination was palpable. Ordinary travelers were suddenly confronted with the extraordinary, and the ordinary flight had transformed into a silent theater of awe and speculation. The young woman's thoughts returned to her formative years, recalling the countless hours spent in flight academies and on the tarmac, learning to command aircraft and anticipate every variable in the sky. She thought of the trust placed in her by fellow pilots and superiors, the responsibility of executing missions flawlessly, and the discipline that had become second nature. All of this now manifested in subtle, instinctive gestures, a tilt of the head, the adjustment of her hand, the precise tracking of passing jets, each action a reflection of a life lived at the highest levels of aerial mastery. Passengers who had been quietly observing her now shared glances of astonishment. A young woman seated across the aisle whispered to her companion, Do you realize who she might be? I've seen flight documentaries and no civilian acts like that. She's a professional, maybe even an Air Force commander. Others nodded silently, realizing that seat 14A contained someone extraordinary, someone who had lived a life far beyond the ordinary world they inhabited. Even the child who had been watching her earlier seemed to sense it, eyes wide with awe at the calm authority radiating from her presence. The retired colonel, unable to contain himself, finally spoke quietly to a flight attendant. Do you see what I see?
She's elite.
There's no question. She's trained at the highest level. This isn't just skill. This is experience, leadership, and mastery all in one. That salute, that's not ceremonial, that's instinctive, earned over decades of command. Maria, the flight attendant, nodded silently, her curiosity and admiration growing. The realization of the young woman's extraordinary past was no longer subtle. It had begun to unfold fully in the perceptions of those paying attention. As Flight 427 descended toward its destination, the young woman remained composed, her hand lowering from a final dignified salute. Passengers had quietly pieced together enough evidence to understand, at least in part, the significance of the gestures, the notebook, and the calm authority she exuded. A sense of awe hung in the air, a silent recognition of a life of discipline, courage, and mastery revealed subtly in a confined space. The ordinary routine of a commercial flight had been transformed into a narrative of extraordinary achievement, witnessed by those perceptive enough to see beyond appearances. The cabin, once filled with the hum of ordinary travel, now held a reverent energy. Eyes lingered, whispers circulated, and the collective realization began to sink in. Seat 14A had harbored someone remarkable, someone whose life had been defined by skill, discipline, and courage. Passengers, crew, and observers alike felt privileged to witness, even in fragments, the life of a woman who had mastered the sky and whose salute had silently communicated respect, honor, and experience. As the airplane touched down smoothly at its destination, the story of the young woman in seat 14A had left an indelible impression on everyone aboard. Conversations bubbled quietly among passengers, connecting dots, sharing observations, and marveling at the extraordinary individual who had blended seamlessly into ordinary life. Flight attendants exchanged subtle smiles. The captain noted the calm and composed passenger, whose presence had influenced the energy of the cabin, and even casual observers carried a newfound respect for what had quietly transpired during the flight. Finally, as passengers disembarked, the young woman stepped onto the tarmac with the same calm poise that had defined her entire presence. She carried no airs, sought no recognition, and yet her story had been quietly unveiled in subtle gestures, attentive observations, and instinctive acknowledgement by those who had recognized extraordinary talent when they saw it. Her life, once hidden and disciplined in the shadows of the sky, had left its mark. A tale of mastery, respect, and silent command witnessed by those perceptive enough to see beyond the ordinary. And though the world outside the cabin would never know, those aboard Flight 427 would carry the memory of the salute, the presence and the hidden identity of a woman who had commanded the sky, leaving an indelible impression of awe, inspiration, and respect that would linger long after the flight had ended.